Hey there, I'm Melody Fletcher, and I want to welcome you to the Conscious Conversations series. The idea behind these conversations is that, as it turns out, black people and white people don't really talk to each other about race. Okay, black people talk about race all the time, but white people, not so much. We don't really know how to. It's uncomfortable and potentially very risky. I mean, what if we say something ignorant? Well, yeah, that's probably totally going to happen. But that doesn't mean that we can just ignore these conversations. So, some friends and I decided to have those conversations publicly. Huge, massive gratitude and appreciation to everyone who agreed so readily to participate in these conversations with me and so generously share their insights, wisdom, and time with me. I won't keep you any longer. I hope that you enjoy today's conscious conversation. All right, welcome back to Conscious Conversations. This is Melody Fletcher, and I am here today with Alex, who, Alex, actually, you are the one who, more than anyone, inspired these conversations. You're the one who kind of kicked all this off with a question that you asked inside one of my groups, one of my student groups. And you asked me to kind of give you the information that I was receiving on George Floyd and that situation. And I did that. And that was an experience. It was something I'd never done before. And so that kind of led to the process that led us here today where we're having these conversations together. So I want to give you massive, massive credit and a big thank you for showing up that way and having the courage to share your pain and kind of say, what the hell, So welcome, huge welcome to you, my love, for joining me here today. I'm really, really glad you're here.
Thank you, Melanie. Excited to be here.
So, why don't you start us off by telling us why you're here, why you agreed to do this, and what's going on with you? How are you feeling in all of this?
Yeah, so I think June was a rough month for me, like it was for many people, very triggering in general. And kind of to backtrack a little bit, the question kind of came out of like a little spot of being triggered and also being like a little bit angered. So like the original question I asked, like in the REX group, was about Black pain and Black killings being used for white enlightenment. So whether or not some people come forth just to teach, particularly Black bodies and everything like that, which is a very it's a great sentiment and everything like that. But then obviously when things actually happen in the global scale, it can be challenging to hold that type of belief and everything. So I think June was a triggering and rough month. It brought up a lot of my trauma. It also brought up, I think, a new level of empowerment. So yeah, I wanted to come and kind of share more about my story, the things that I've been through, and also to hopefully shed light on the pain and the experiences like within the Black community, and hopefully the hope as well.
Yeah, and I think your question was so good. And just to kind of offer a tiny little bit of explanation for people who have not maybe had this level of energy education. We use certain terminology, we use certain concepts, and your question centered around her was a reaction to the idea that whenever anything public happens, it's a co-creation. And everybody who is involved in that, even if they're just aware of it, has a reaction to that, co-created in that in some way. Now, co-creation does not mean that you made that happen. It means that there's a reason that you're experiencing it. There's a reason that you even know about it, right? And the idea that when someone dies publicly, it is often to create reactions in those around them. And of course, when Black people are killed by police officers and they're unarmed, and which I mean, boy, do we have one hell of a pattern going here. You think it'd get our attention. The the idea that I think you were reacting to was, you know, that this is somehow meant to wake white people up. Like, we're going to just keep killing black men until it gets so uncomfortable for white people that we'll finally do something. And the messages that came through, just to kind of paraphrase it slightly, is that no, it's not to wake white people up. It's to wake black people up. This is for you. This is for your empowerment. You're not here to heal white people, you know? And I thought that that was such a powerful question and a powerful answer, which I try to take no credit for. Because it's played to a paradigm that I think is so visceral in our society, which is that white people, and this is a belief system when I'm talking about white people, so relaxed white people, I'm not talking about all white people. There's many different kinds of profiles out there. But in the world, systemically, white people have told everybody else's story. White people have told your story. It's always being told through the lens of white people. How does this affect white people? What are white people thinking about this? You know, a black man dies and we're talking about the officer and what should maybe happen to him. And was it, you know, was it this or was it that? And we're not talking about George Floyd anymore, you know? And the message was that, you know, it is your story. Stop, you know, white people need to stop telling your story. And maybe white people need to start telling their own story. Maybe we're afraid that we won't have a story if we don't tell anybody else's story, you know? But I think that was kind of, you can tell me if I'm wrong, but that was the impetus for the question being asked, is like, it seems so unfair. Like, we're supposed to martyr ourselves so that you guys can learn. Like, fuck you, you know? And I agree with that. Fuck us. Like, you know, if that's what we were saying, that's not what that teaching was saying. But I think it really opened up a big dialogue and a big discussion. For me, definitely, which is, well, then we have to start listening to your story. And this is, you know, I think what you're here to do today, to tell us your story, right? So let's start with your story. You know, I think of just your trauma. You said you've been dealing with your trauma. It's kind of visceral. It's right there in your consciousness now. So probably a good time to tell that, you know, what came up for you and what perspective did you come to maybe as well, to sort of show that healing journey as you've just gone through a really difficult time.
Yeah. So I grew up in technically the South. The area I grew up in, like, had plenty of Confederate flags. I found out when I was in high school, there's a KKK group that meets regularly, like 5 minutes away from my house. But really was none the wiser. Obviously, I was a kid, didn't really understand, you know, what the world, what would come at me in the world.
Yeah.
And by the age, I would say like of 4, I became aware that I was different than most of my friends. It was a mostly white community. And then by the age of 4, that's when, like, you know, you start hanging out with your friends and you start...
Different in a negative way?
Different in a negative way. I don't think before I was age 4, I fully understood that I was, like, different than my friends, and different in meaning we'll be treated differently. And so the story I also shared, like, in the last REX call, was about my trauma around going to different slumber parties. So the first slumber party I actually went to was around like 4 or 5. And my whole group of friends at daycare, we were very young. We were all planning my one friend's slumber party. It was like her first slumber party where she could invite friends over. So we all, like, were planning the snacks and what we're going to do, what movies we're going to watch, and all that kind of stuff. And then a few days before that slumber party, was supposed to happen, my friend like pulled me aside and said, you can't come because you're Black. My mom doesn't like Black people. And so the slumber party actually happened. And I wasn't invited. I just like sat in my room all day, like I didn't go. And then a few weeks later, my mom did find out I didn't go to the slumber party in like.
So you didn't tell anybody at the time?
I didn't tell anyone at the time, no. And my mom eventually found out like what had happened. I think called her mom, and then they agreed that I could come over, just hang out with my friend one-on-one. And when I finally did go over, I was told like not to touch anything. And when my mom and my brother came and picked me up, my brother was treated the same exact way. They lived like in an apartment at that time too. And like after I left, they claimed that my brother broke the door handle and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so then wasn't invited back. And then the second story that I processed with you was a slumber party I went to when I was 8. Again, an all-white slumber party. I was the only Black person. And I was actually there. And when, like in the middle of the slumber party, my friend whose house it was, her mom pulled her aside and like whispered something. And then Heather then pulled me aside, the girl that I was hanging out with, and then said, can you hide inside the closet? My dad's about to come home and he doesn't like Black people. So then I hid inside a closet for, I don't even know how long of amount of time that I actually spent in there. But yeah, and so by the age, I would say around from 4 to 8, those elementary years, those were very formative years. And by the time I was 9 or 10, I think I fully understood what it meant to be Black inside this world. Like I think when I was younger, I knew I was different, but I think I had a chance of acceptance. And by 9 or 10, I was almost fully rejecting my Blackness. I didn't want to be Black. I was pretty much by those like early preteen years had like dove into a depression. By the mid-teenage years, I was suicidal. And then by all throughout those teenage years, I was self-mutilating around not being able to fit in. So I think like there's all types of inherent beliefs that type of trauma embedded into me. But I think the biggest one was that I will never be accepted because I am Black. And even though like with the police shootings of George Floyd and everything like that, I've never had that exact experience around the police, but have had experiences around being marginalized, feeling different, and feeling the self-hatred that comes with living in a society where you're told you're less than because you're Black. And it's taken not only like the law of attraction in the spiritual community, it's taken years of therapy, trauma support, yoga, all these kind of like self-help things that will dig people out of a hole. All of that, I've used every single tool in the toolbox to help heal myself from those thoughts. Yeah. But I think my story illustrates really well about the hatred that can be internalized when society at large like doesn't validate Black emotions and Black feelings. So oftentimes, even when I came out and told these stories, I started talking about them mostly like I would say like late high school, early college. That's when I started like really not more frequently talking about them. And I think that's when I fully had the vocabulary. Like, yes, when I was 4, I like finally told my mom like, oh, I wasn't at the summer party. I didn't have the language to really communicate like, what I was feeling. I don't even think I fully had the language till the end of high school to really even know like that was bad. But Yeah, I think it wasn't until I started like frequently talking about them that's when I started getting the feedback from white people that that couldn't be real, that maybe I was just a bad kid, um, like some way, like trying to imply like in some way I either deserved it, I'm exaggerating.
The
Uh,
white people are not at fault. They must have had a reason for doing what you're doing, what they're doing. You
like,
must have done something, because we cannot wrap our head around the idea that these were just racist fucks.
and it's like that also, it would require people to change their worldview
Yeah.
around what it's like, and that these are, you know, by if you see them down the street, they're not wearing, they're smiling, they look, they're not like, um, they're not obvious racist. They can fit inside of your community. They, I'm sure if anybody met these people off the street, they'd be like, they're great, they're really nice to you. And I think that's always was the most disappointing part, is when I actually did. And that was the part that I really think I had to heal from even more so than the trauma. It was the gaslighting that happened after the trauma. And it was the constant um, needing to justify and explain my emotions,
Yeah.
and explain my experiences repeatedly for people to understand them, um, and to actually take them seriously.
Not only did something horrific happen, but you're not really allowed to heal from it, because you're not really allowed to have your reaction to it. You know, don't be upset. That didn't happen. It probably didn't happen the way you think it happened. And even though I know this is not the same, because not all the variables are there, but I think it helps for women to put it in the context of, you know, you've been raped, you've been sexually assaulted, and then everyone's like, well, what were you wearing? Well, you must have provoked, you probably wanted it, you know, where that's unbelievably ridiculous. And yet that is what we went through for most history. I mean, it's very recent that maybe we don't go through that as much anymore, right? And I know it's not the same because, you know, it's not something we deal with 24/7 generally, but I think it helps to draw some parallels sometimes to kind of go, oh shit, yeah, we do kind of know that feeling, right? Um, so one question I have is, as you were growing up, um, some of this must have been talked about at the dinner table or with your mom. How, if any, how is this explained to you, um, in terms of, you know, preparing you for the world, or what kind of paradigms were enforced there? And this is not to sort of say like, well, if your mom would have just explained it to you properly, that's not what I'm saying here at all. But, you know, these things are happening to you, and they're happening to you because of your race, which, you know, if you're in a Black family, how is that talked about? How are these things talked about? Or are they talked about in that way? Like being recognized as trauma?
Yeah, so like I said, like I didn't really speak about those specific incidents until I was like, you know, like a teenager in high school. And so when I actually did speak about them, the closet incident particularly, I don't think I told my dad. That happened when I was like, you know, 8 or 9. I don't really remember the year. But I didn't talk about it until I was 16, to anyone. Um, and when I finally told my dad, he was just like, he was shocked. He was shocked that I actually been through that. And I think his first response was, no wonder why you want to be white. Um, and so it wasn't really talked about. And I think it was more so an understanding of what had happened to me versus like a direct confrontation of what happened in that experience. I will say in general, the person that talked about race the most inside of my life, in general was my grandma, half of my family, they immigrated from Panama, and they live in Brooklyn, New York. And she was very, very vocal. So Brooklyn has, like, this long history, now being gentrified, but also from the 1950s to current day, it's like a cultural mixing pot. So they have all these different neighborhoods, all these different nationalities and everything like that. But the part of Brooklyn that my grandma grew up in, or has a house in, is mostly a Black Caribbean neighborhood. And so even when I would go up and visit her in New York, she was very conscious of race, very conscious of moving throughout Brooklyn, all the crimes that had happened in Brooklyn, how Black neighborhoods were being over-policed versus other sides of Brooklyn weren't being policed. And in general, just like a uncomfortableness whenever we had to go into Manhattan, of like, you have to look buttoned up and everything like that. Because of course Manhattan, that's where most people work and live, and that's where like the big companies are, and versus like Brooklyn being like where it's residential. And yeah, she was just very conscious of how we go out into the world and how people will look at Black people, even in New York City, which is known to be like this metropolis that's, accepting. So yeah, I think she was the one that taught me the most about race, and what she would normally say is like, white people are racist and white people don't like you.
So even in that conversation, the outcome really was that this is a world that you don't really belong in. It's very dangerous to you. And that's just something that you have to kind of accept.
Yeah, I think she was, the person that also opened up my eyes to white people oftentimes don't even know when they're being racist, so you might as well just watch where you go. So I'm thinking of a particular incident that happened. It wasn't the best neighborhood that she lived in Brooklyn, but my brother, he was walking down the street and saw a needle and picked it up.
Like a hypodermic needle or a
heroin needle. And it was someone, obviously this is Brooklyn, New York, that's a normal thing you see in the city. But my brother was, young, like 10 or something like that, and like brought it up to my grandma, like, look what I found. And she was like, absolutely not, and like grounded him while we were on summer vacation, and like made him go and read a Malcolm X novel to like basically understand Black history and everything. Like, I think it scared her. It scared her, even though like this was like a kid's curiosity of just
right.
What is this?
Like, what is this? Yeah.
But it more so, it like she knew what it meant, and particularly what it meant for Black men to, one, even be holding a needle, but two, like, if he even entertained, and my brother would never do drugs, but to even entertain that, she wanted to shut it down immediately. So like this understanding from like the matriarch of our entire extended family, that if you make the slightest mistake, it could mess up your trajectory. So let's like get in line immediately.
It just feels very, very dangerous. Like everything's dangerous, and you have to try to navigate this world. But danger lurks everywhere, even in a way, and you can tell me if I'm getting this right or not, but even in a way from the inside. Like, you have to watch your own action. You could make a mistake with the heroin needle, like you just picked it up, but that was wrong. Like, but why was that wrong? Like you could get this wrong somehow. So not just the world is dangerous, but also you have to take responsibility for that. It's kind of your fault if you didn't navigate it correctly. Is that right?
not like it's your fault, but it's like, it's more so like, it's similar to fault. I think it's like responsibility. Whereas I feel like if anything ever did happen, you know, my grandma's response wouldn't be like, oh, it was your fault. It's like, I told you so. I told you, like, this would happen if you made a mistake. So that's a different kind of, I feel like, energy than it's your fault. Like, it's yes. Like, it's like, we realized the fault is on the system.
Right.
The system was going to eat you alive, so you had to navigate around it. And I gave you the playbook.
Right. But there does seem to be a sense of responsibility that if it goes wrong, it's somehow kind of, you made a mistake. You didn't see all the danger. You didn't navigate it correctly. Something there. I'm trying to get at it, and I'm maybe not doing a great job of it, but it's kind of breaking my heart a little bit, because it's not just like the system is totally against you. It's almost like, well, it's your responsibility to navigate that incredibly broken system.
Yeah, I think, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I think, like, if anything were to happen, I think this is with like the larger Black community, you realize it's a broken system, but the responsibility is on you to not make the wrong move. So like, what's coming to mind for me right now is like the murder of Emmett Till, which happened, I think, back in the 50s or 60s.
Okay.
And I guess if you're not familiar with it, so it was like a Black teenager, I believe, who was walking in, I think in the South, and a white woman had passed by and had claimed, or I think he whistled at her, and then she went home, told her white family and friends, and Emmett Till was like beaten to death and then hung. And then when the mother actually saw the body of her son, which was mutilated, she made the funeral. They made it be an open casket so that everyone could see what society had done. And that photo of his open casket got put on the front page of every single newspaper in America, which sparked a whole new like wave of the civil rights movement of how could you do this to a teenage boy or whistling at a woman.
Right.
And I believe on her deathbed, she did admit she exaggerated a lot of the claims, but she knew what had happened to the boy and she kept it a secret for decades. So you think about, even if it did happen, like if he did whistle and, you know, whatever, a woman was walking down the street, a small thing that most teenage boys could do at any given point got him murdered. And I think that that kind of terror is in the cells of Black people, particularly those that have grown up in America, African Americans. And when you think about, and there's tons of research right now being done on intergenerational trauma, and particularly in the Black community, what does it do to a person to have that happen to an extended family member, and then to see then your father being denied of a job, and then you also see your mom not being able to afford basic essentials and all that kind of stuff. What does that whole entire environment, and then it gets pushed down into your body when you're being birthed, and it has all these different health implications. They're just like really getting an understanding of that in the science now. But you can only imagine. I think you can only imagine what that does to a population at large. And then you think about how then you live in a society which then tells you the results of your life are your fault. Particularly in a very individualistic society like America. with no real understanding of the intergenerational trauma, the history behind racism, all the stuff that's being uncovered now around just the plight of Black people in America. And then to have the double-edged sword of people then telling you you're an equal opportunity hire, you don't deserve any of like the benefits you're getting or something like that, you're a welfare queen, all these very racialized, the pushback of affirmative action, like all this kind of stuff.
Like you're asking for extra.
When you started 400 years after everyone else, when you didn't have generational wealth at any given point in America, and even when you tried to build it, it was burned down. So, and you think about these different communities, like within America, Tulsa was nicknamed the Black Wall Street, and it was bombed, like literally bombed. When you try to make advancements, and if it threatens the status quo, then all of a sudden you're killed, and you see your family members killed, or you see your community killed. You see that in the police brutality right now. That stuff gets internalized, even if it doesn't happen to you or your individual or your family. You still know it could be you at any given point.
Yeah.
So you have to play by the playbook to avoid it. And right now, like, there's this huge reckoning around like uncovering the history of our Confederate monuments and everything like that. This retelling of the Confederacy and all that kind of stuff, and being like, oh well, the Confederate generals, they were great and everything. That's like a huge myth that's gone throughout the South, where people believe like the generals were great military leaders, even though they were defending slavery.
And they weren't even great military leaders.
Well, they lost.
Those stories I just saw a thing the other day on General Custer, where it's Custer's last stand, and that was Native Americans, where it's like, well, he made this last stand and he's this noble hero, and it turns out that he was really shitty soldier. And after his death, his wife tried, really lobbied to get movies made about him and everything, so created this myth around who he was. And now historians believe that Custer's last stand was really him just not scouting the area, running his entire platoon into a much bigger force and getting decimated. There was no nobility in it whatsoever. And let's just, acknowledge that he was committing genocide. Mm-hmm. This is our hero, and when I love the fact that real history is starting to come out, and I don't want to be disrespectful, because I totally understand that Black people have known this for a long time, but white people have not. What we get taught in school is a completely whitewashed version, and if you don't get told that it's a whitewashed version, you don't know what you don't know. You don't know to go out and find the book or the resources. And thanks to the internet, that's much more available now. Before, I remember when I was a teenager, it was really hard to find information that somebody didn't point you to. The world was smaller, the information scope was smaller. It's like what you were exposed to in your bubble is what you got, unless somebody said, here is a book from outside all of this that you should maybe read. And our teachers did not do that at all, and I don't even think when I was a kid, when I came to America, I don't think there was such a thing as Black History Month, or if there was, it wasn't in Idaho. I don't remember even having that education. I don't remember when that started, but I don't recall it. So if they did have it, they didn't do a good job, because it left no imprint. So there are huge gaps in our knowledge. And I think, right now, there are wonderful resources being made available on Netflix, on Amazon, and, mainstream books coming out, or books being highlighted that have been out for a long time that nobody, really knew about, or we didn't know about. where we can educate ourselves, we can get the real story. But that can be hard, because then you have to realize, you know, my people did this. And that's kind of what a point I want to speak to and talk to you about a little bit, because it's something that I'm, you know, discovering, is that when something happens to a Black person, particularly in America, the Black community feels that. That's solidarity. You know, when something happens to a white person, or a white person does something, that's just that guy. You know, for the most part, the white community does not feel solidarity with that person, because I think white people don't consider their whiteness a race. We don't have a race. You do. You know, even though it totally informs our culture, it totally informs our, you know, experience. But we don't feel that solidarity. So when a white guy goes into a church and shoots a bunch of Black people, we don't sit there and go, oh my God, we as white people need to start taking a look at ourselves. We're just like, well, no, that guy did that. That's got nothing to do with me. Right? We don't feel that connectedness with each other. So we don't feel that sense of responsibility, and also don't feel that sense of responsibility historically. And it is my view, and please tell me if I'm wrong, but it is my view, through more education that I've gotten this week, and looking at different responses from people, and that a lot of white people, again, not all white people, a lot of white people come to this from a sense of neutrality, that we are somehow neutral in this, but we want to help, versus actually feeling a connection to these events, realizing that it's our wound too. And I think that many times is almost incomprehensible to people of color. Like, how can you have that point of view? But it's also unbelievably offensive and condescending to come at this like, well, do you need some help? Do you need some help with your empowerment there that I have nothing to do with? You know, that I am not a representation of anything, and what? I didn't do anything. And that sort of being divorced from this whole process, like, it really isn't our issue. It's yours. But, oh, I'm a good person. I want to help. Like, I think that is I see that, and I see that's really often the huge gap in communication between people of color, Native Americans, Black people, Hispanic people, and white people, and white reporters, for example, who will ask questions, and the way they ask the question is already unbelievably offensive and tone deaf, and then not understanding why there might be pushback to that, because there's no understanding of the fact that it's offensive for you to come at this like it's not your problem, like it's not your issue, like you have nothing to do with this. Can you speak to that a little bit? Am I on base? Am I way off base?
No, I think you're 100% correct. I think oftentimes, at least when I was growing up, there was always this retort when Black people would bring up racism or any type of event or slavery, and saying that like the remnants of slavery are still here. It'd be like the sentiment from white people often of, get over it. This was hundreds of years ago.
Right.
Move on. Stop harping on the past. And it's also said with the sentiment of the gaslighting again, but also, so what do you want me to do about it? I can't do anything about it. It's been a long time. And maybe you personally have never owned slaves, but you can probably look back in 2 or 3 generations ago. And I'm talking about like, not just like your great grandparents, like, and they probably did. If they grew up in America, they probably did. And then you think, okay, that's 3 or 4 generations ago. What got passed down to you? What went unquestioned to you, like as a white person? Like what how does that hatred, how does that abuse and torment not only affect Black people, but how does that make you see the world and the people? Do you automatically just pick up these thought forms without even realizing it? If you're born into this world, and you always say this too, you're not born a blank slate. You're born with all like the energy around you and everything like that. You're also not born into a world like, yeah, no one's born racist. No one's born in the woods. Like, and if you are, like, then okay, then like you probably have a whole host of other things, problems going on. Yeah. But you're not divorced from society. No. You pick up white supremacy, misogyny from looking at TV and looking at movies and all these subtle ways that if they go unquestioned, you're just going to act like that it's normal. And I think this is why the LOA community and the spiritual community we're really good at tackling our beliefs and our belief systems and questioning them. But I often, at least me, as a person who's been in these spiritual communities for years now, and I grew up Christian, but by the time I was 16, I was like, this stuff doesn't really jive with me anymore, and started like heading towards spirituality. So I've been in this community for almost 15 years. It's had a really hard time, I think, confronting these systemic issues, and not just trying to wash them over with, we're all one. Why are we talking about this?
Right.
And of course we are. Of course we all want to be one, but you can't, it's like spiritual bypassing. It's we want to get to the end result before we ever deal with the hurt and pain. It's I don't see color or anything like that. Like, of course you do, you have eyes. Yeah. And even they've done experiments with blind people. They can normally tell the person of the color of someone's skin by the way they talk and by their voice. And they can even tell you the stereotypes. They pick it up. So I think it's realizing we all are born into the society. We all pick up these messages from society. What are you actively doing to work against them? Right. So when people approach this like anti-racism work and everything like that, I think it complements the law of attraction and kind of the belief system around it of you need to tackle the individual thought patterns. And sometimes these happen on a subconscious level. You don't even realize what's inside of your mind until you really start, for the example of like money beliefs. You don't realize like your parents passed down like money doesn't grow in trees or something like that. Your parents could have also passed down like walk across the street. If you see a Black person, you don't even really realize it. So, and then you do that for decades and decades, and all of a sudden you turn out to, have maybe a Black employee and you don't treat them right. So,
but you think you do.
You think you do.
But you think you do. Mm-hmm. And if anybody comes along and says, I don't think that's, no, I'm not a racist. I am not doing anything wrong. I am treating them the same. Because you're blind. This is what denial is. It's blindness. You're blind to how you may subtly, but not so subtly, be actually disenfranchising a person or holding them down without having any clue that you're doing it. It's not necessarily a conscious sort of, I'm going to keep you down because you're Black. These are the insidious things that we are often not aware of. That, and I hope to shine a light on some of those things, because I think people, when they can understand some of those examples, do you have an example of some of these more sort of subtle forms of racism? And I'm really kind of putting you on the spot right now, but.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's plenty of documented forms of like Black people being denied promotion, Black people being paid the lowest and everything. I think in the corporate world, those manifest pretty clearly. They manifest in the data, but they don't no one is going to come out and call me the N-word if I go into work. Like, that's not appropriate, and people know that. But they will say, I just don't think she has potential. Like, and I don't think she's really getting it and everything like that, without ever doing this type of work where they're really analyzing their beliefs.
Well, and it's easy to gloss over that because it sounds like a really plausible argument.
Yep.
You can't prove to me that this person actually has that much potential and I'm somehow discriminating against them. Mm-hmm. I have watched them work and they just don't have it. I'm sorry. Now, how can I prove that or disprove it, right?
Yeah.
So we have to, it becomes easy to push away, easy to explain away. But then when we start looking at overarching data and going, really, so you're saying that none of these Black people have potential?
Yeah.
Like, this isn't just one person we're talking about, right? There are patterns here that have to be looked at in terms of, and I don't have the answers to this. I worked in the corporate world, and I often ask myself, like, how can I know that I'm not being racist? I mean, I actually did ask myself these questions because I'm like, looking at my department, I wasn't working in the United States, but I still definitely have people of color, working for me. And I liked to think that it really didn't make any difference to me what heritage you were, what color, what religion, what gender. And yet, how do you know for sure, And even looking at my department, I thought, well, yeah, I have people of color, I have people of all genders, I have transgender people. And yet, are there prejudices in there? How would I know? And how can you ensure? And like you said, maybe it was you or somebody else. I think it was you in the conversation that we had the other day. It's like just getting a token Black person in there doesn't solve it. Yeah. Oh, well, I hired a Black person and now we're not racist anymore. It's looking for those underlying things, but that's not an easy thing to do. And, I think that's where looking at the data can help when you start spotting the trends and going, wait, how can this happen if we're being truly fair? Or, well, Black people just don't apply here. And somebody said to me, was it Sharon or Mikosi? Oh, I'm so bad at remembering who said what to me, but someone else, said to me, it's like, well, maybe you need to take a look at how you're formulating your ad. What's the language that you're using? Are you inadvertently filtering out, sending the message that, people of certain groups don't bother applying? Because then you can go, well, no Black people applied. It's not our fault.
Yeah. And
but also, are you allowing them to apply?
Like, these huge companies have these enormous recruiting budgets. They can easily put their resources. I'm talking about Fortune 500 companies, yeah, and even startups too. Like, even if you have a small budget, you can, if you set the intention to make a diverse company where people from different backgrounds will come in, you can do that at a startup. These bigger companies that have millions of dollars that go annually to recruiting, they could source from an HBCU. Like, they could, there's plenty of Black people in tech groups. And like, there's all these types of little mini groups where they could source talent from, but they choose not to. It's not, you just don't want to put the time and energy into it. But you're seeing now, when there's a national crisis and there's this national movement, that all these companies are now trying to recruit. They knew what to do. They knew what to do all along. And they have this quick turnaround time now because someone's told them about it before. And someone told them.
It's becoming a PR issue now.
Yeah.
Let's be honest about it. The corporations are sociopaths. They don't give a shit about you and me or our colors or our genders or anything. But when it becomes a PR issue, which I don't have that big of a problem with that, to tell you the truth. Not that, I love them to be sociopaths, but I don't really care why they're doing it. The fact that they are doing it is a sign of change. The energy has changed a bit. But yeah, I think you make a great point. It's like, on some level, because I try to have compassion for everyone in this whole process, which is kind of what I do. It's my job. And so when I say, white people don't understand this, I want to have compassion for why
why don't we understand this? And, you know, maybe it's not because we're evil people, but because that probably doesn't lead to healing, just calling everybody evil, you know? And yet, some of this has been known, and we can't really claim a corporation with an HR department and lawyers and psychologists and, you know, can't really claim that they're not aware. And as you said, they're implementing it real quick now. So this has been known. And so there's more to the story, that even when we do know, and even when we have known, we haven't done anything about it. So, you know, claiming pure, like, well, we just didn't know. I get that can be a massive trigger, because it's like, well, yeah, some of this you clearly didn't know, and you kind of had no way of knowing because it's not your experience. But some of it we did know, you know, and we still didn't do anything about it. And my question is always like, well, why not? What's underneath that? Why haven't we taken action on the stuff that we did see, that society did see? Why hasn't society taken action on that until absolutely forced to? Yeah. Because, well, it's going to be a PR nightmare now, you know? I don't have an answer for that yet. I'm looking, I'm exploring, you know, but these conversations are helping, I think, open people's eyes so much to the stuff that we don't know. We don't know your experience. We don't know each other's experience. What are we missing when we're looking at the world only through our own lens? Well, a whole lot, you know. So speaking of, you know, white people trying to help, the question that I ask in one way or another of everybody that I'm talking to is, what can we do from your point of view? What does advocacy or allyship look like to you? Because, you know, we can sort of agree that most white people have no idea what to do. But those who do want to help, instead of going into savior mode and thinking that we can figure this out on our own, and we shall be the white saviors rolling in and saving the black people, the poor, disenfranchised black people, that's not a good idea. Number one, energetically doesn't work. And number two, it's condescending as fuck. So if a white person does want to help, and you don't need to speak for the whole black community here, just yourself, your point of view, what is helpful to you? What do you want to see more of?
Yeah, so actually the other day I was listening to a podcast. It's made by Melissa Urban, who started the Whole 30 Diet. She has this podcast called Do the Thing. And she was talking, made a podcast, particularly because her audience is majority white women.
Thank you.
I don't know if that was a reaction. So she made a podcast episode for her audience that's majority white women. And it was based around Byron Katie's work. So Byron Katie's work, if people aren't familiar, it's you ask yourself these series of questions to really interrogate your beliefs. And the work that she was doing it around was this triggering thought of, people need to stop calling me racist. People need to stop calling me this thing that I don't want to be called. And so she goes through the series of questions from Byron Katie of what this will actually do to her life. She believes that people need to stop calling her racist. And she realizes by the end of this that if she chooses to keep on to this thought, her world will get smaller. She will surround herself with people that won't call her that, which will probably be people that look like her and won't challenge her beliefs at all. She will have to stay guarded from most people in society, because as everyone else continues to do like this anti-racism work, she'll have to move away from it. Because she will be more likely to be called out as
right. To mitigate the danger of being called racist, you just surround yourself by people who are never going to do that and stay away from situations that might challenge you in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. And so by the end of it, she really comes to this conclusion of, I don't want to hold on to this thought. And that's what the whole Byron Katie method is really great at. Of like, I don't want to hold on to this thought. What's the alternative thought? That like, I can let people call me racist. And I actually want people to call me out when I'm perpetuating the system, because I don't want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
And so when I think about what white people could do, as I think really doing that deep inner work, and I have been saying this since the beginning of George Floyd, I think a lot of people have called themselves allies almost immediately, because it was just like, yes, I want to help. I am an ally. Of course I am. I don't want Black people to get killed. Of course, no one would want that. Like, only a sociopath would be like, yes. Or you know, a KKK member. And
there are a few people, but hopefully not as numerous as it seems. And I don't think it's as numerous as it seems.
Absolutely.
Hardcore.
And I think most Black people, most people of color understand that 95% of white people are not like KKK members. But you have this whole sector of white people that don't want to really get involved with the racism discussion. It's a little bit too messy. It's a little bit too emotionally volatile. You can easily go into shame spirals. You can easily go into denial. You can, at any given moment, if you get called a racist or something like that, or saying you're perpetuating the system, that's going to require some inner work. That requires you to have done your own healing to be able to say, you know what, like, let me listen to that person. Let me not center my emotions right now, because I want to make sure I'm doing it correctly. Not about being me personally being right, but I want to make sure I get it right the next time. And so I think what needs to be done is for people to do the inner work so they can center other people's voices inside this discussion, not have that knee-jerk reaction to gaslight, because that is another part of racism and white supremacy, is gaslighting, of telling people their experiences aren't real. And to actually do the healing so they don't go into shame spirals, which then and the shame causes people to get out of the discussion, to be like, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not getting my hands dirty. People need to stop calling me names, when it's about breaking down an old system. And the only way you break that down is by doing something differently. And I think when you are challenged, when people do say, look, that really offended me, and look, like, that's hurtful, and these are the reasons why, if people give you the grace and the time of day to do the emotional labor to tell you it is wrong and tell you why and share the resources and everything, then take it to heart. Don't immediately say, then, why would you say that about me? You know who I am. You know I'm a good person. Like, let it.
That's why I'm sharing this with you. Otherwise, why would I share it with you if you're a horrible person? That's why I'm giving you this information.
People are not sharing anti-racism resources with KKK members.
Yeah.
They're a lost cause. Like, people are sharing it with people that we know want to do well. Here's the way.
Yeah, who have a chance of actually hearing it, and who are wanting to help, and who are wanting to understand, right? Mm-hmm. I think it's flattering when somebody shares information with you rather than an insult. You know, I think you're so stupid, you need to know this. It's like, oh, I think you might actually be open to listening to this. Why would you waste your time on someone who's not gonna hear you, right? So I think that's beautiful. It's a great message of, you know, face your inner work. And I think I could draw a parallel, because I mean, obviously I've been doing energy work for a long time, and one of the things that I often have to teach people is don't quit too early. So, you know, you might work on getting some energy going or letting some resistance come up, and usually people stop at about 15 seconds because nothing's happened in 15 seconds, and then they stop. And then I'm like, if you just sit with it for a little longer, if you sit with the discomfort that you're in for a little longer, something will happen. And, you know, I think that this is human nature in a way, but when people start to engage with racism, with race issues, with the idea that maybe they stepped on someone's toes, there is this tendency to want to make it all better really, really, really fast. Mm-hmm. Can I just feel better already? Can I just can you absolve me? Or can I just say the right thing or do the right thing? Or can I just throw some money at the end of the ECP or something? Like, what can I do to make this go away? Instead of, why don't you sit here and be uncomfortable and see what happens? Stay with it longer. Let yourself be uncomfortable. Let the situation be uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for everybody. It's been uncomfortable for a long time. But if we keep running away from that discomfort, no healing will take place. So if we can start to do our own inner healing journey, asking those questions, noticing when, maybe we haven't gotten the reaction that we wanted, and then noticing our reaction to that. So for example, if I go out and I decide that I can help some Black person with something, and I didn't bother asking them for permission to help, I didn't bother, so I'm giving unsolicited advice, unsolicited help, which no one likes. I didn't bother asking them what I might do to actually help them, so I'm not respecting that they know their situation better than I do. This is the white savior thing, right? And then that Black person responds by going, not with utter delight and appreciation for what I have done. And then I respond to that with defensiveness by going, what do you want? And my heart hurts in that moment, because what I wanted to do with something was to feel good. And now this doesn't feel good. If I take a look at that whole sequence of events, I might very well come to the conclusion that, oh my gosh, I actually am the bad guy here. I actually stepped on someone's toes. I hoisted my help upon them. I was disrespectful. And perhaps not consciously, not purposefully, but I was, right? And anytime we're giving unsolicited advice, it's actually a disrespectful thing, because we're not respecting the other person. It comes from a good place, but it doesn't work. It's not helpful, right? And that's a painful process to go through. Oh my God, maybe I was rude. Oh my God, maybe I could have approached this in a better way. But unless we go through that process, we don't know next time to go, why don't I go ask? Why don't I go ask, can I help you? How can I help you? How can I assist you? And also let it be okay for the person to say, no, I don't need your help. It's not your job to create an opportunity for me to feel better about myself. Yeah. We've been talking a lot in these conversations about, respect. And how I think we often, as people, don't know how we disrespect each other, but we do. And this is blatantly obvious when it comes to the race issue. It's not only present in the race issue, but it's so blatant. How there's still so much condescension in how we deal with people of color that we are absolutely not aware of. When you start to see this, you start to watch the news, you start to watch talk shows, and I think I'm starting to see the world a little bit more through your eyes. And it's heartbreaking and shocking and infuriating to see people behaving this way and be completely oblivious of how they're actually being perceived and how it's coming across. But and this is an uncomfortable process, to be sure, but I think it's a very valuable one to start to go, oh no, this is what, it's kind of like in that movie They Live, where the guy gets his special glasses and sees all the aliens and all the alien messages, and then I don't know if you've ever seen it, but he gets his special pair of sunglasses, and then he kind of sees all the billboards have the subliminal messages, and these aliens who are really ugly are masquerading as people. And it's sort of, then in the end, he turns off the mechanism. This movie's from the 80s, so I'm not spoiling anything for anyone. Then he turns off the frequency or whatever that's causing people to not see what's really going on. And it's kind of like that, as far as I'm concerned, where we're kind of turning off that veil, or taking off the glasses, or putting on the special glasses, and being able to go, oh shit,
you know, and these are difficult realizations to have, particularly when you start to understand that this is yours too. You don't get to look at this like an outsider. We're all being affected by this and have been for years. It's a tough process. It's a tough process. And yet those of us who've been doing inner work for years, we know it's always a tough process, isn't it? You know, but I think that's I know I talked a long time here, but I think that's a beautiful message to go do your inner work. Go take care of your shit. You know?
Yeah, I think so much of this is just like being able to hold space for other people. And this is the exact work, like when you do all these spiritual practices and you meditate and you have questioned your beliefs. If you've done all of that, you are capable of going into these conversations and having the tools, if you are triggered, to take it back with you, rather than unleashing that on someone else. If you learn the tools around doing a constructive anger release versus, you know, an unconstructive anger release, then you can have the tools to then separate, okay, this could be an unconstructive way for me to tell people I'm a good person and that you shouldn't call me these types of names, versus, oh, let me go and think about that by myself. Why don't I go and journal about how that has affected me, has caused me shame? Let me go and talk to my therapist about it, rather than, you know, let me go and talk to a Black person and really convince them that I'm really good. And like, you should like vote for me as favorite white.
Validation. If you, you know, and then I can go out into the world and say, well, you know, a Black person told me that I'm not racist.
Yeah.
So I have my passport, I have my stamp of approval, and now from now on and nevermore, I don't have to involve myself because I'm okay, right? And there is, and that it seems like a crass way to put it, but that happens all the time, you know, and we don't realize that we're doing it. We're like justifying ourselves. I've done it. I've said to people like, well, you know, I have a lot of Black friends, you know, and then I'm like, why did you feel the need to just say that? Why are you justifying? But then I ask myself that question, right? Why did I just feel the need to say that? Did I just feel attacked? Did I just feel like maybe that person didn't get me? Did I want them to see me in that light? Like, what was that about? You know, I mean, sometimes it's relevant in the conversation, but is it always? And when it isn't, why'd you say it? You know, what were you trying to affect in that moment? And it's that sort of self-questioning that, yes, can get really tiring. And you know, can get really, after a while, you're like, oh, do I want to do this anymore? But I have to say, in that moment, I remind myself, and it doesn't mean we can't ever take a break and, you know, rest, but I remind myself that, yeah, it is my privilege to walk away from that and take a break, because Black people don't get to. You know, you guys have to deal with this 24/7. We don't. So maybe we can put in a few hours.
Yeah.
Kind of check it out.
I even think about like the first 2 weeks, like after George Floyd had died. I've seen this come from multiple social media accounts. Some people I knew, like friends and everything like that, that were all white, that kept on saying like, I'm just crying all the time. I'm so upset about this. Like, I cannot believe this. And I think it was a worldview being challenged, that the world, of course the world accepts Black people. And of course, like, these things don't happen, even though they've been shown multiple times. It was a final breaking down of like, this is happening.
Right.
And it crumbled a lot of, it crushed people. It's, their worldviews came crashing down about how the world will operate and how the world will treat people differently. And then two, I think it's really realizing the pain of the Black community became centered in America, possibly for the first time ever, on that massive of a scale.
Yeah.
And I think witnessing that pain made a lot of people that were blind beforehand just break down, because the pain is overwhelming. It's overwhelming to realize, not only were your people enslaved, but killed, tortured, that these Jim Crow laws, you were then segregated, you were told you can't drink out the same water fountain as people, you were lynched and killed, then you could barely get a job because people don't think you're qualified. That's centuries of pain all of a sudden being brought up to the surface in a matter of a few weeks and being centered.
Yeah.
And so there's this urge right now to go back to normal. Let's try to get back to normal. I just cried and I was overwhelmed for these past 2 weeks. I need to get my life back. And some of that is real. Like, some of it is like mental health. And, you know, you can't be crying all the time because you're not going to be as effective as an ally if you're just breaking down in all these conversations. But at the same time, like, you need to rest and restore. But at the same time, you need to keep dipping your toe back in it.
You can't go backwards.
You can't.
You can't unknow what you've come to know, even if it's painful to know it. You know, you can't just take a step backwards and hide again. And I think you're right. It's a breaking down of a worldview, because for a long time, I think we held on to the idea that these were isolated incidents. This isn't really systemic. This isn't, you know, maybe they did something to deserve it, or, you know, sometimes shit happens and it, you know, maybe this one time it really wasn't fair, to, oh my God, this is happening all the time. And it really is that way. And I think, you know, when you're saying, it's like, well, you know, thinking about Black people weren't allowed to use the same water fountains and couldn't get a job. But, you know, that's in the vernacular in the United States. But I wonder how many people think about what that really felt like, what that really means, what the real repercussions of that are, what it meant to be a slave, and what the knock-on repercussions of that are, instead of, well, yeah, that was slavery and we don't have it anymore. You know, like, it's sort of, again, it's a separation from that, instead of real empathy of, what would that do to you as a person? Not just in that moment, but overall, for the rest of your life. What would it do to your children, your grandchildren? What would it feel like to walk in a world where you are sometimes treated worse than an animal, certainly not ever an equal, always having to be on guard, always having to be afraid that if you step on a line that you probably had no way of knowing was there, that you could get killed? You know, what would that be like? What kind of that daily traumatizing of a human being, re-traumatizing. And then when you dare to speak out about it, it's like, psh, that didn't happen. Or get over it. It's no longer happening. What would that actually do to a person? What would that do to me? How would I maybe react? What would that do to, you know, if that had been my mother, if that had been my grandmother, you know? And I mean, I have to say, it's not the same thing, but my grandparents were refugees in World War II. My grandfather was put in a concentration camp for a while. We're not Jewish, but he was anyway. You know, they were refugees from no man's land, which became the Czech Republic. They were technically German, but they were refugees. And I had not lived through that. I wasn't even alive when that happened. And I had ancestral energy that I had to get rid of out of my body, where I hated the German government. And I didn't know that until I was in my 30s. I had such hatred for them and resentment that they treated my grandparents this way. I hated the Catholic Church because even though we were Catholic, they got turned away and got no help because they were refugees, right? And the universe triggered all this out of me in a beautiful way. But it was incredible, like, how that had affected me through my DNA, through my ancestry,
that I had not lived through that, and yet it had affected me, right? Now, that was one war. That was a time that was not generations and generations of that shit, and it wasn't even a daily thing. They were able to eventually build up a life. They were able to eventually get to where they wanted to go, you know. But that is like a tiny, tiny version of that, and it affected me greatly. You know, where I really, I mean, this hatred came out when I felt like, you know, the Germans, I felt that rejection.
Yeah.
And I didn't even realize how deeply it affected me until I was, you know, I do a lot of energy work and it popped out at some point, it manifested. And so, you know, looking at how we can be affected by things through our heritage, through our DNA, through our ancestry, being born into belief systems, picking them up, not even being consciously aware of them. When all of your family for years and years and years has been part of this, energetically, it will affect you massively. In 3D, it will affect you massively because, you know, it's kind of like a relay race. The first guy gets hobbled. The second one is already gonna, like, he's not gonna get, you know, and then you hobble him too, and then the third guy comes along, you hobble him too. Is there any chance you're ever gonna finish the race?
Yeah.
Like, what? You should have run harder. You know, we all had the same chance, right? So there's a knock-on effect. And I think that is something that people also have a really hard time wrapping their heads around. That there is, you know, it's like, well, nobody ever handed me anything. You don't realize that there's a knock-on effect from years and years and years of, well, I think being hobbled, you know?
Yeah.
And also the benefit of not getting hobbled. Because I know that there are plenty of white people out there who are going, I'm not doing well at all. I'm not ahead. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't seem to be benefiting from this. You're benefiting from not being hobbled by this. I think that might be a clear way to put that for white people.
Yeah. And I think, like when you see terms like white privilege thrown around, like it's not saying that white people have never experienced pain or trauma or anything like that. It's saying your trauma and your pain won't be caused because you are white. You don't have pain linked to your experience of being white, and particularly on a massive scale. So even if you know, I'm sure there's one person like, well, I do. One time someone called me X, Y, and Z. Not systemically, not happening on a large scale, and you're not looking at all the people that look like you around you and saying it's happening to them too.
Yeah,
and we don't know why, or we can't figure out how to get ahead of it. So I think there's a lot of defensive-ness when it comes up when people just say white privilege and, well, what's privilege? What do you mean? Like I've had an advantage.
What privilege do I have?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And the privilege is on site. People don't automatically have these negative conceptions around who you are. So your intellectual capability, even in like the positive sense about athleticism and all that kind of stuff. Like there are all these things that are attached to Black bodies, particularly around criminality and danger, that you will not experience because you are white. So you think, and we talked about this the last time with Colin Kaepernick, and when a football player literally took a knee at a football game, you know, this isn't John Hopkins or something, like some type of like, you know, super buttoned up.
It's a football game. I mean, sacred to many, I get that, but it's a football game.
And during the national anthem, which is a song, like granted, it is the national song, but America is unique in the sense that it's very attached to its flag and its national anthem, and like, this is us. Whereas when I've traveled to other countries, it's like, yeah, we have a song, we don't really know it, like, yeah. But anyway, took a knee, and the vice president of the United States shows up to intimidate players that are in support of of Colin Kaepernick. The second most powerful man in America, possibly even the world, just given how much power America has, showed up to literally tell a Black person and other Black players that were supporting him, you can't do that.
Yeah.
That is how much you think about that dynamic and how innate it is to control Black bodies through intimidation. And this is not 100 years ago. This is in everyone's recent memory. Yes. Yeah. And that, granted, there's tons of criticism around this administration and what they choose to prioritize. We all get that. But they chose to prioritize going to a football game and making sure people stood up during a song in a country that values free speech.
And society didn't really have that big of a problem with that. You know, and the conversation got completely hijacked towards, you know, should Colin Kaepernick be allowed to do this? And you know, is it against, you know, nationalism and blah, blah, blah. Instead of, like, his message, what he was trying to highlight wasn't really part of the conversation most of the time anymore. Which I find kind of ludicrous, because I'm like, this is, you know, especially with tomorrow, it won't be tomorrow when this comes out, but when we're talking about this, it's July 3rd. So tomorrow is July 4th, you know, Independence Day, the day of freedom. We celebrate our freedom. But it's not freedom for everyone, is it? Because when a Black football player wants to kneel to highlight the fact that Black people aren't free, we lose our goddamn minds instead of saying, shit, right on. Yeah. I found that quite heartbreaking, but very, very indicative of, again, hijacking the story, telling a completely different story. This story of what is this, how offensive this is to white people, how offensive this is to nationalism, how offensive this is to American pride. And the story of the Black people that Colin was trying to highlight just went away again.
Yeah.
Why can't we tell that story? Why can't we tell that story?
Not only was the story hijacked, he lost his job. And, you know, granted, he probably will get hired back with all the recent events and everyone trying to be on the right side of history. And then the NFL even did, like, a formal apology. But he lost his job, a job that he had been trained for his entire life. He lost it because he exerted his right for free speech in America that we love to always tout. He lost his job. Like, that, not only, like, I think it's the ramifications around it too. Like, that needs to be stressed as well. It's not only like the story and the cause that he was fighting for was, you know, sideswiped by, wow, I'm offended that you would kneel. I'm so offended that I feel that you need to lose your job and never be allowed back into the NFL because of my feelings.
We get to shut you down.
What?
We get to shut you down.
Yeah.
We're allowed to. That is our privilege. We get to, you know, you went against the system. We don't like it. And not only can we come and publicly send the vice president to publicly tell you that you don't get to do this, but we can fire you for it. You know, it's like trying to send the message still over and over again. Sit down, shut up. You don't get a say. You don't get a voice, you know, and you don't get to complain. And if you make waves, it will not go well for you.
Yeah.
And that, you know, looking at it from a systemic point of view, really like that we still feel entitled. When I say we, I mean our society. We still feel entitled to tell Black people to shut up and sit down. And that, I think we need to shine a light on that. You know, that we still feel entitled to do that you can disagree, but you don't get to tell people that you don't get to talk. And especially when somebody is fighting for equality, is fighting against injustice. And to tell anybody like that, if some white guy had said, I'm taking a knee for breast cancer, everyone would have been like, oh my God, what a fucking hero. Right? But a black person, no, I'm serious. That totally would have happened. Oh, he would have got a sponsorship deal. It would have been on, Ellen, whatever. But a black person takes a knee for black rights, and suddenly it's, oh, no. You are trying to hijack this beautiful moment to highlight, our independence from England and trying to make the story about you. It's because we don't like the cause that you're highlighting, right? We don't want to hear about racism. Talk about something we want to hear about, and then we'll support you. Right? We don't want to hear this story. We don't want to face this story. I think it really bears being talked about, and being talked about from a point of view of why that is such a problem. And I know you guys don't need to talk about it, but we do.
Yeah, and why, I would challenge anyone that was offended when Colin Kaepernick took a knee, because I'm sure people can think back and, I disagreed with that. What was so offensive about it? What did it trigger within you? It could have been yes, you thought it was disrespectful to the military and all that kind of stuff. But why the deep anger? I think that is what is so telling about the Colin Kaepernick kneeling, is someone literally sat down during a song. Granted, it is the national anthem. There's plenty of people that have fought and died for this country. We understand that. Why did it trigger something so deeply?
Yeah.
That you felt that it was justified for a man to lose his job? And I would challenge someone too to think about all these recordings of white people that have said the N-word, all these celebrities and all that kind of stuff. Do you think they deserve to lose their job? And some people are losing their job now. Are you challenging? Are you thinking, why would they? Why is that? It's a direct challenge of what do you value in society?
Yes.
We know the N-word has this long history of being used against slaves and all that kind of stuff. Kneeling for the national anthem, yes, it could be disrespectful. I think Colin Kaepernick, even when he chose to do that, he consulted a military member, and the military member said it'd be best for you to kneel. That wouldn't be disrespectful.
It's usually a sign of respect, actually.
Exactly. Because he didn't want to be disrespectful to the military. However, people still took it, and even when he explained, yes, I talked to a military member, and this is what he told me to do, to not be disrespectful, but to still be able to protest, and people still internalized it. Why is that so worth internalizing versus, someone saying the N-word? These are the same kind of policing of words and speech that what we now see as the American right really push back on, of why you snowflakes and all this kind of stuff. You get offended by all these little tiny things. Then why were you so offended about someone kneeling?
Yeah.
And that's the two sides of the
snowflake now.
Yeah, it's exactly.
I have a question, because I wonder how many people were actually offended by Colin Kaepernick kneeling before they were told to be offended and what to be offended by, before that was framed as an act of disrespect against the flag, the military, the nation, the song, the national anthem. I wonder how many people actually had that reaction in their own minds on their own, and how many people only reacted once they were told to react, once it was framed in that way, And they're like, oh, well, you shouldn't be, because I'm having a hard time thinking that all those people came to the same conclusion on their own. But once it was framed that way, they probably didn't even notice, to tell you the truth. They're probably like, oh, I wonder why the guy's kneeling. Like, and then it was framed that way and put to them that way. It's like, this is a disrespectful thing. This guy's not okay. And then people are like, oh, disrespectful. Because, of course, there's discomfort in this. Something uncomfortable has come up, and we have to try to rah, scream that discomfort down, right? But I think that that's something that, we're so easily manipulated into having these mass reactions to things that we don't even question and go, wait. Because once it's told to you, this guy has disrespected our nation, disrespected our military, disrespected our national anthem and everything we stand for, then people are naturally going to go, oh my God, he did what? Well, that's not okay. But how about we question, did he actually do that? Before we have a big blowout reaction. Wait, does that mean that? Wait, no, as far as I understand, he took a knee for Black rights. No, he disrespected the flag. You see, it's hijacking the conversation, but the hijacking the conversation in order to shut that down.
Yeah.
And I think we have to become aware of that and question that. Like, wait, like if he did that, yeah, then we can get upset about it. But did he actually do that? Let's take a couple steps back and evaluate from here and not just accept how this is being framed.
Yeah. And I would say like that, I think that makes sense. I think most people were told that were viscerally hating Colin Kaepernick for taking a knee. They were told this by different news outlets, different commentators, all that kind of stuff. But I even think that speaks more to systemic racism. That as soon as a Black person literally kneeled on the ground, there was a coordinated effort by the powers that be around what we need to do to him, to discipline him. And then that was adopted, that was told to the masses and then adopted. And then all of a sudden you're feeling like these deep levels of hatred because you were told this by different media outlets and different thought leaders and everything like that. This view was also told to your friends and your families, and they have it unquestioned. So it's all around you. So all of a sudden you think it's now right. And it didn't, it was a belief that went unquestioned. This goes right back to the Byron Katie thing. Question like your own internal beliefs. What is actually yours and what is not? Why do you feel, why have you perpetuated certain systems? Why do you feel certain, like this deep visceral anger? Why do you feel offended when people say the word white, when all we're doing is pointing out an obvious fact? Why do you feel like on guard if someone says, like that really offended me. Like, I think that was kind of a racist comment. Why all of a sudden you go into a shame spiral? That is taught to you. Like, that is even a bigger illustration that this is a system and a thought belief that you were born into. And unless you do the active work of dismantling it, you will just continue to perpetuate it. Yeah, I think that illustrates it perfectly. I think if that is the case, that most people did not even believe that makes it almost even worse, because it just means, one, that the system is invested in controlling Black bodies and coordinating it. And then two, that they will disseminate this message to a bunch of people. And three, they know these people will take it and then spread it around their communities. And all of a sudden you have this entire population that now believes a Black man took a knee and was being very disrespectful to the military.
Yeah. And I think that's, I think we just highlighted beautifully how systemic racism does involve everyone. Mm-hmm. Because they orchestrated they decided to frame the situation and then actually manipulated the white populace to have a racist response. And let's take responsibility. We did have a racist response. That's why we're saying, like, start questioning so that you don't necessarily get manipulated in a response that may not even be what you truly believe. And yet, again, if you feed people the right lies, you can get them to respond that way, but they're not really responding to the event. They're responding to how it was framed, the information that was told to them. And so, you know, it's a great way, if you're going to subjugate people, you know, to get them to subjugate each other, to through propaganda. This racist system affects white people too, because they're being manipulated into supporting that system and perpetuating that system without necessarily consciously knowing about it at all. So as we become conscious about it, we can all take ourselves out of that system because it's hurting us all. But when white people think, well, we're not really involved in that. Yes, you are. And here is a perfect example of how that happens.
Yeah.
I think that's powerful.
And if you continue to, going back to the kind of Byron Katie of like, people shouldn't be calling me racist. If you choose to hold on to that belief, all of a sudden you're cutting yourself off from learning the ways in which you're manipulated, the ways in which you were told automatically Black people don't have potential to do that. And you don't want to believe that. If that is genuinely not a value of yours, you don't want to believe that. But there's all these subtle things that you were told through books and movies, history class and everything like that, where when the decision actually comes of, do we think that person has potential? Is that person doing something wrong? Why is that person kneeling? Like, you choose to go with the status quo. And if you start to uncover that the status quo was built on racism and white supremacy in a very literal sense, like slavery, colonialism, this is a very literal sense. I'm not exaggerating.
Literally built. Yes.
Yes. And that the status quo is invested in you keeping those thought patterns.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you want to dismantle it? Like, why would you want to buy in to a belief system that, one, isn't yours, and two, doesn't match with your values? If your value is truly that you want equity and justice for all, then choose that belief system. And people are telling you, there are books being written that are all over the New York Times bestseller list right now saying, this is what justice looks like. This is what the new world can look like. Well, this is what a world that's built on equality could look like if we could really face our old wounds. And there's so many people that are now, diving into that work, but there's also a whole segment of people that are saying, stop it. Stop taking away my sense of normalcy.
Yes.
And that normalcy was awful for a lot of people. It was awful.
For the people who are yelling it as well. There's a denial because you're like, if you're this defensive, your normal's not good. You're not feeling great all the time. It's just that you're afraid that it's going to get worse. And you're already feeling so shitty that you think, well, I'm going to fight like tooth and nail so it doesn't get even worse. This is a survival mechanism. But what if it could get a whole lot better? And this fighting is actually keeping the better from coming. And we never really often think about that when we're in that fear of change. Oh, it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. What if it gets a hell of a lot better? For everyone, for you included, which of course we obviously believe is happening. So we could talk for 8 more hours for sure, and I do so enjoy these conversations, but do you feel like you were able to bring your message across, or is there anything else that you want to express? I'm going to give you a chance to do that.
I think like my core message and like kind of what I started with was my own trauma and how that has impacted me in my life. And I think ultimately, like this entire conversation around racism and everything like that, on the emotional level, like there's like, you can boil it, you can bring in history, you can bring in academia and all that kind of stuff. But on an emotional level, I think it has to do with trauma and healing trauma. And I think racism, white supremacy is a trauma. that has happened to the entire world. I think that's why the Black Lives Matter protests spread so quickly. It became a global movement and not just an American movement. But it's a wound that's very deeply embedded into America. Like racism comes in all different types of flavors. Like I've traveled, and it's in a lot of places. But in America, it's a very unique flavor, and it's not good. So I would say for America to heal its wounds, like we really need to think about what white supremacy has done to us, our, like in a visceral sense, like what it has done to our bodies, how it has manifested in health issues for the Black community, higher cortisol levels, they found that in the Black community, all these different health effects and all that kind of stuff prevalent in the Black community. But also, what's that done to white people? What has that, because it's hurting us all. Like, yes, it's probably hurting Black people the most because we're getting killed. We're also being denied certain things. But I don't think this is the world that most modern people want. This isn't what any of us have envisioned for, a utopia. This is actually quite the opposite. Everyone's saying 2020 is horrible, but it's unveiling a lot. It's unveiling
change. It's a year of waking up, and waking up is a bitch.
Yeah, exactly. And you're seeing now the trauma, and I think that goes back to like these overwhelming feelings that people felt throughout the month of June, these crying spells that people were falling into. This is hurting everyone. You are seeing the pain of Black people exposed on a global scale, but you're also seeing this is not what you want to be participating in. And you don't even know all the times in which you're participating in it.
Yeah.
It may seem so subtle and so unharmful, and you're perpetuating the system. And so I think my parting words would be to examine your own trauma, one, so you don't bring it into these spaces where you're just spilling it out and you make the conversation about you. Please do not go into an activist group or anything like that if you're called to do it and be like, well, let me talk about my feelings as a white person. That's not going to go over well. But I think healing your own trauma so you can make space for other people to share theirs and actually help in those situations. And more importantly, just listen and hear and not have a reflexive reaction. And then I think also studying the history. And I think as law of attraction and spiritual communities are very present and future focused of what could be. And yes, we're all reaching for this world where this does not exist, where these systems aren't perpetuated. But I think in order to really understand the full spectrum of the trauma, you have to study history. And I think and once you study history, you realize how deep that wound is, and you realize that you need to commit to this work for an extended amount of time to actually dismantle it. So yeah, I would say heal yourself and heal your own trauma. I would really recommend that podcast from Melissa Urban. It's called Do the Thing. And the podcast
send it to me. I will list it underneath the video.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Studying history. I think there's tons of books right now that are out. I'm seeing different Twitter threads where people are uncovering, I didn't know, this happened, all that kind of stuff. I even saw this back in the early 1900s, they think it was a joke, but it's very telling. In the South, they particularly think it's in Florida, there was all these different postcards of white people feeding black babies to alligators to lure them in to get alligators, basically like fishing almost. It was, they think it was a joke, but they found all these remnants, and they have like this old song that jokes about throwing black babies into the water to get alligators. My point is, even if that isn't true, that speaks a lot to how heinous the crimes were against black people and how dehumanizing the black experience has
That
been.
would be considered a joke?
Yeah.
That people laughed at? Wow. I mean...
Yeah, and like I said, they don't have evidence that actually happened. It could have happened. I'm sure someone, was like, oh, it's a funny joke. But even if that never did happen, the fact that that was considered, a comedy speaks to America has deep roots in the project of dehumanizing black people. And if that is true, then understanding how deep the wound is absolutely necessary. Like, I don't think people should skip over learning the history of America because there's so much there. It's much more readily available now. It's being readily available on Netflix, on Hulu specials and everything like that. You can look at recent history in the past 10 to 15 years, look at the Black Lives Matter movement. You can also look back at slavery. You can look back at Jim Crow. Think about how deep the wound is, and I think that automatically opens you up to what it means to actually dismantle this, because it's dismantling a huge system.
I totally agree, and I, as a law of attraction teacher, I just want to say that I know that a lot of teachers out there are like, just focus on the future and just feel good about everything, and I don't really teach that. I think that if you don't, you need to go into the problem. You need to do the uncomfortable work of understanding the problem, because otherwise you have no chance of finding a solution. And I have been inspired to do, probably for the last couple of years, to do a lot of research into history. And it has brought me a tremendous amount of understanding, and I'm not done by any means, but I'm beginning to understand the patterns and the frameworks and the constructs and the things that we're repeating over and over and over again that lead to the underlying causes. I think that when you understand the pattern, just like in your own life, and you're like, okay, I keep going out with loser guys. Why do I keep going out with loser guys? You take a look at all those instances and you take a look at what's underneath that. And then you can find that thread so that you can get rid of that so that you don't have to attract loser guys anymore. Right? And, so when we look at history, we can see these things repeating and repeating, and we can see these patterns, and we can see the underlying belief systems. And that's, I think, when we have a chance to actually start to make meaningful change. And that history is not comfortable. That history is not pretty. We've done some shitty things. Humans have done some really horrific things to each other. We have capacity for great cruelty. The United States has done some shitty things. So have all other colonializing nations. Yeah. This is part of our history, and I don't think that we have to whitewash that or put that away, because that's part, some of those things are still alive and well today.
Yeah.
So that's not, that happened hundreds of years ago. A form of that is still happening. And so we need to understand, where that came from. So I think studying history in this, it can get a little confusing from an LOA point of view, because it's like, well, quit telling the same story. But if the story won't go away, then you have to take a look at the goddamn story. And the story has not gone away.
At all.
So thank you so much, Alex, for being, so courageous and being willing to be part of this with me. We're going to put your Instagram underneath. So if anybody wants to contact you, they can do that. And if Alex has changed her mind, then there's no going to be any Instagram. So I'm going to leave it open, keep it nice and flexible for you. But if it is, then you can, contact her. And if you want to talk to her about anything that was said today or anything else you think that it might be cool to connect with her, then please do so. We're going to continue the series, I'm sure. But thank you for everybody who watched all the way to the end. I don't know how long this is going to end up being. We've been recording for over 2 hours, just so you know. But thank you for watching. And once again, thank you, Alex, for being here. I really, really appreciate you so much with all my heart.
Yeah. Thank you, Melody. I really appreciate you letting me do this.
I'm proud of you. Huh?
Thanks so much for watching this installment of Conscious Conversations. If you're a person of color or other group whose voice needs to be heard and you'd like to participate in a public conversation like this, or if you know someone who would be perfect for this format, please contact me through my website at melodyfletcher.com. Otherwise, I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. Did you enjoy this format? Were there any aha moments? Were you left with more unanswered questions that you may want us to answer in future conversations? Did you get uncomfortable? If you're a person of color, do you feel that your perspective was represented? Let me know in the comments. All voices are welcome, but we do ask that you keep it respectful and constructive. In other words, what you have to say is important, just don't be a dick about it. Until next time, I'm Melody Fletcher, and thank you for bringing your light to the world.